Hello and welcome to The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck. We have a very special guest for you this week, as well as next, to talk to us about some really exciting and surprising revelations. Jim Wilhelmsen was the pioneer of the first evangelical Christian motorcycle club in Detroit in the late 1970s. He was a resident of Roswell, New Mexico for several years, where he owned a store and museum dedicated to providing a biblical answer to the UFO alien phenomenon. Jim is also the author of the book Beyond Science Fiction, where he provides a biblical perspective to topics including, but not limited to, UFOs, aliens, hollow earth, and time travel. It is an absolute pleasure for me to welcome to the show my personal friend, Jim Wilhelmsen. Jim, how you doing?
Okay, thank you for having me here, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to do this. It's
Sure.
I know we've been trying to get you on the show for a little while now. We're finally able to correlate our schedules.
Yeah, great deal.
Awesome. Well, for those who might not be familiar with you or your work, can you give us a quick rundown of your testimony, like how you came to know Jesus and how that led to what you do today?
Well, most people, I think, touched the bottom and then found Christ, and I had actually kind of climbed to the top as far as I was going to go anyway, until I found Christ, and it was in that frustration, I guess, of going to the top. But I mean, I had a crazy childhood, like who didn't really, I guess, in these days and ages, but I was a survivor of the 60s, or so I'm told that I was anyway. I was a kid growing up in the 50s. I was fascinated by the space program. I was fascinated by, I was a sci-fi nut, and back then they had all the B-rate sci-fi movies that came out, and so I was kind of fascinated by that and drawn into the whole phenomena of UFOs, and watched and read pretty much everything until about the mid-70s, when it started getting a lot of metaphysical New Age stuff and what I called religious stuff. My interest waned in it, and I just got away from it. Just really, I started out as a nerd, and by a nerd I mean I grew up in out in the country, but it's mainly a blue-collar neighborhood, mostly auto workers living here in the Detroit area, and but I had all these nerdy kind of, in that neighborhood you just don't have a telescope, microscope, a butterfly collection, an insect collection, rock collection. I was kind of a nerd like that. And I remember one time, so I was always getting picked on too by the rest of the kids. One time I got caught with my butterfly net out in the field, and of course the next day everybody was laughing at me and beat me up and stuff. And so it's funny. I grew up kind of getting bitter around my teens. And I had a friend, we had a job working at a gas station. I had a friend who bought a motorcycle, and he let me ride it, and I just fell right in love with it. I just love bikes and just had to get one, and since I was working at 16, I went and bought my own, and that invariably led me into getting into a bad crowd where I was accepted. The thing was that, whenever I get into something, I really get into it totally, so I became pretty good at riding, even though I was a geeky nerd type. So much so that when I was 17, I had a lot more hair than what most 17-year-olds had, and so I passed for 21, got in an outlaw motorcycle club in Detroit, packed a 45, had a big attitude, a little guy syndrome, Napoleon thing. I had a lot of junk going on in my head, and it was not a good thing. Now, fortunately, my parents weren't Christian, but they were Ward and June Cleaver. I mean, they were very moral. They gave us, my brother and I, a very loving home, so I was raised, good and right. And so the crowd that I got mixed in, I got involved where I actually had to clean up after a murder that was in the clubhouse. And then I realized that, this isn't kid stuff. This is really serious, and I don't belong here. I'm not like that. I'm not one of them. So it caused me to change directions in my life. But at the same time, Uncle Sam had ideas. This was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and the next thing you know, I'm wearing OD green and in the service. I had a life-death experience there where the Lord supernaturally delivered me, and even then I didn't get saved right away. It took me about 4 years. Long story short, I got busted with drugs because on one hand I was good at what I did, but the drug problem back then in the 60s, you had marijuana flashbacks, and they were going to kick you out because you couldn't be dependable. So, but I really believe my first sergeant was a Christian, and he had pity on me, and he showed me that I had potential. But he said, you know, as long as you're going to be in the service, you have some things that are over your head that's never going to change no matter what you do. So I want to give you a chance. If you promise me you'll get off drugs and do something with your life, in 3 weeks I'll have you out of the service with an honorable discharge, and you can go to college on the benefits. Well, in the middle of the Vietnam War, yeah, okay, where do I sign? And I did just that, but I tried, you know, I still had a problem smoking marijuana on and off until I did finally get saved. But for the next 4 years, I pursued, you know, I stuck to my agreement with him. I got off the drugs, got out of the biker lifestyle. I started, you know, trying to do something with my life. I ended up getting a degree. I got into artwork, did metal sculpture work. At 20, I think I was at 23, I had my own house. I had a wife. I had a kid, a newborn. I worked full-time. I actually talked my way into working at a shop where I worked 3 days a week. Got paid 40 hours for those 3 days, 13 hours a day. And then the rest of the week I worked in I had a little small art gallery in a mini mall, and I ran my art business. So I made really good money right away. Had cleaned myself, you know, from the drugs and everything. And I guess maybe there was a little bit of pride there too, that, you know, look what I did. You know, I came from, you know, a mindless guy that just swallowed every kind of drug he could get a hold of, to somebody that had gotten a degree, had gotten his own business, had a new house, a new car. I had pretty much everything I wanted. But, you know, I was always one that saw the bigger picture, and I was watching how the war was going. I was watching and noticing that the Arabs were about to nationalize the oil fields, and I realized, you know, with this is like a 1-2 economic punch to America. When the war comes to an end, there's always a recession, and then with the oil thing, it was going to make a major impact. So I started getting ready to go out of business for my art business. Art being a non-essential, the first thing everybody's going to, you know, cut out. And at the same time, I'm warning everybody else, you know, don't quit expanding. You need to, you know, cut back and get ready for some hard times. Well, I didn't get burnt when it did hit. We ended up having a really severe recession at that time. And it was at that time that I was frustrated and angry that here I had, you know, done all that I could in my life to, you know, put my life back together, but there was other events going on, global events that I had no control over. It was taking it all away. So it was a lot of anger and frustration. At the time, I started getting back interested in some of the UFO stuff, and let's see, what was that book? Chariots of the Gods came out, so I started reading all kinds of other junk books like that, you know, and I picked up one from Kmart, and it was called Late Great Planet Earth, and I thought, oh, cool, another one like that. Started reading it, and I realized it's a Christian book. What in the heck is a Christian book being sold at Kmart for? Boy, how dare them? That's a tricky, you know, sneaky thing. So I threw it in a corner, you know, and I just said, well, I'm not even going to mess with that. That's crazy. But at the same time, when this job that I was working at, we had a little janitor there. Guy's about 62, about my age, what I am now. But, you know, little black guy from the South, probably had a third-grade education. And he was what I would describe extra dark chocolate black. I mean, he was like an African black, you know, but yet the weird thing about him is he walked around in his dark shop, and he was just like shining and glowing with light coming from his face. And always smiling, always singing songs. So I asked him, you know, what is it with you, man? You're a little bit different. And he told me that he was an ordained minister, and that, you know, he loved the Lord, and he had the Lord in his life, and it made him, you know, happy and sing and all this stuff. And I thought, boy, he's a goofy old man. But I was drawn to him, so I kept coming back and asking him things about God, things about life. He only had a third-grade education, you know, so he wasn't, you know, the brightest crayon in a box. But boy, when he started talking about the Lord, he had wisdom that was way beyond his ability to know. And I just like, man, I got to know what this guy knows. This guy really knows something. I've never seen anybody so happy and calm, you know, about things, and never had a bad word to say about anybody. Well, it was through his testimony that got me interested in starting to read that book, Late Great Planet Earth. And then on a June or July summer day, I was all by myself at my house, and I was almost finishing reading the book, and at the very end it had this prayer, and I answered the prayer. I said, you know, Lord, if you are who you say you are, come into my heart. The only thing I can describe, it was for me a defining moment. I know some people just kind of acclimate into it, but with me it was very drastic, very dramatic. I called upon the name of the Lord, and I just felt a warm blanket of love come over me. I started bawling like a baby, and I probably stayed that way for about a half an hour. Just all the hurt, the anger, just purged right out of me. And from that moment on, I became a Christian. I remember one time, reading about Late Great Planet Earth was about an eschatology that I actually no longer believe most of it, but it mentioned about the Antichrist. And I remember having a prayer one time in my infancy, newfound faith, and I prayed. I said, Lord, if this guy's around now, I want to fight him. I want to be in his face. I want to do whatever I can till I die. If I'm in this time right now, I want to do whatever I can to fight him and expose him and just help me to be the warrior for you. And it's like one of those prayers that you just know that God's answering it, and that kind of stood out with me. So long story short, I started to grow. I got into a great little coffee house ministry that was kind of a leftover from the Jesus movement, and geez, we had classes. Most of us that went there were college kids. I was already a college graduate, so I was in with kids. But we had teachers that were going to, one that was going for his PhD in ancient biblical languages and archaeology, another one philosophy and biblical hermeneutics. So I mean, we got like college level education right from our church. We had Bible studies where we actually took notes, where we had tests, and they did it in such a neat way that nobody felt belittled or they weren't up to par. Everybody felt included and part of it, but we really did in-depth studies. So by the time I went into Bible college, a lot of it was just review I had already had from my church. So I had a mentor. He taught me how to use reference materials. I mean, right at an early age, I started going into the ancient Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and I was really fascinated by it. I remember in 1978, I asked the Lord. I said, I know some of this UFO alien stuff is real. How does that fit into your word? Do you have anything to say about it, Lord? Well, in 1978, I was already an ordained minister. I was, pastoring the King's Kids, the first evangelical motorcycle ministry in Detroit area. And the Lord showed me Genesis 6. He showed me a couple other scriptures in Daniel, and I knew that somehow this was part of an end-time deception. It was bad, and I just touched the tip of the iceberg. But I gave my first sermon on Genesis 6 and the connection with UFOs and aliens in 1978. So, that was back when probably a handful of people even knew what a Nephilim was. I mean, it was just unheard of back then. And I remember telling my congregation that there'd be a day and a time if I heard about the a hybridization of the human race or abductees and abductions with any kind of sexual relations, I'd probably have to get back into this full time. But at the time, I was just too busy and didn't know that stuff was already going on. But 20 years later, 1996, I was called into investigating all of this full time. That what I discovered and what I found was so life-changing. I knew that from that moment on, my life was going to change forever, and I would be doing this for the rest of my life. And so in 1996, I started investigating, traveling around. I was in a unique place and a time. I had made real good money in auto prototype, and I had saved up, and then I got laid off. So I took like about 8 months and just fasted, prayed, studied, and then shortly after that, my parents had passed away. I got an inheritance, and so what I did was I got completely out of debt, and then I bought a house, paid a mobile home, and I paid the lot rent for 3 years ahead of time, and I just studied. I did full-time work. I studied. I investigated. I started traveling around, getting first-hand information. I don't want to take somebody else's word. If there's a way and means that I can get right there and interview the people myself and be there in a first-person thing, I'll do it. So I went through an information gathering thing, and once I felt I had enough and knew, then I started going to different UFO shows, conventions all over the country, and just sharing what I knew from the scriptures of what it said. And from being a pastor in the inner city and dealing with different bondages of drugs, alcohol, and things of that nature, I realized that I was prepared or equipped to handle the whole phenomena of alien abduction, which I did, and it wasn't too hard of a leap to go from understanding deliverance and that kind of stuff to conveying it over to the whole UFO alien phenomena. So excuse me, it wasn't like I could go to the local store and pick up a book, alien abduction counseling for dummies. I mean, nothing was ever written or done by it, but I'd been there before. Nothing was ever written or done about creating or melding together a motorcycle club and an ecclesiastical outreach. So between the two, I was able to, create something that was workable. And so I did the same thing with alien abduction and was able to provide counseling and a way of helping people get delivered and set free from the whole experience. So this led me ultimately to the Mecca for the whole world for anything UFO and alien, which was Roswell, New Mexico. I was invited to speak at the first Ancient of Days, and when I went there, more than one confirmation that, I was to go down there and move. And I had just recently gotten married, and I didn't know how to tell my wife that, we were going to move into a little tiny small desert town in the middle of nowhere and pack up and leave. And fortunately, by the time I got home and was thinking about how to tell her, she says, I said, hey, I got something to tell you. And she says, I know, we're moving to Roswell, aren't we? So, well, you made that one easy, Lord, thank you. So we did, and so I opened up a store. Shortly after being there, I opened up a store and had it was kind of like a bookstore wannabe museum, and it was right across the street from the International UFO Museum. From there, I had a radio program. Being Roswell, I mean, all the conventions and major people that are involved, both secular and Christian, always convened in Roswell, so it was kind of like a Grand Central Station. I got to know pretty much everybody that was who that was investigating this seriously. Pretty much got to meet everybody and know everybody that was involved. Of course, this is 2003, so to say that I could do that now would be impossible. I mean, this has broken out into a movement of the Holy Spirit within the Christian realm that it's just grown exponentially every year. I mean, when I first got into this in 1996, there was maybe five or six, including my website, that had anything from a biblical perspective on UFOs and aliens. I think L.A. Marzulli, David Flynn, Stan Dale. That was about it. Chuck Missler. There wasn't anything else out there. And so now, I mean, you can go to hundreds of sites and thousands of people that understand all this stuff. So it's been quite a movement, and it's been it's been very rewarding. My main motivation is to some of it is kind of cranial, some of it's kind of includes a lot of Gnostic and other kinds of material and things, because you're looking over the shoulder of the enemy at his plan. But one thing that a friend of mine told me a long time ago when I got involved in this, he says, just keep it simple, Jim. And it's something that really stuck with me, because if you can take all these things that are rather involved, anything prophetic is always going to be more involved. It's not going to be easy, like, salvation and deliverance is something that God has set so in His mercy so easy that a kid can understand it. But when you get into prophecy and other things like that, then you get into a more involved stuff that requires a little bit of gray matter too, and that's where the Bible says, where Paul says to study to show yourself approved. So there's no shortcuts to it, and it just takes a lot of time, and I invested a lot of my money for that time to study and be diligent. And when I got to Roswell, I found out how well equipped and well prepared I was. I was able to share Christ with at the end of the week, for every 150 people who went to the UFO museum, maybe 3 or 4 would trickle over to my store. But at the end of the week, I'd have a dozen people that I knew I changed their lives, I impacted it. And that's always been my main focus and my main purpose in doing all of this, is not only to help the victims of all of what we're studying and learning, but also to draw others that are being bought into the whole UFO ancient aliens thing, to show them that the Bible isn't fairy tales, that there is a physics, there's a logic, there's a science, there's a real history that has already been addressed, that's contained in the Bible. My premise is that everything and anything we'll ever be faced with and challenged with in our faith is already there, chapter, text, and verse in the Bible, and we just have to prayerfully, diligently seek to find it. So the information part of my type of ministry, I almost compare it to being like the Center for Disease Control. The Lord has equipped me and prepared me with answers for things that right now even most Christians aren't even asking, or not even aware that there's a question, but I've already got answers. So the answers, maybe they'll be able to be used someday. If the threat is there, there's an answer already. If the threat never happens, well then, no big deal. Whatever God has given me, I don't push it on anyone, I won't debate it, and I won't defend it. I'll just simply share it to whoever's willing to listen. So that pretty much covers it. My personal commitment also included, writing a book. My book, Beyond Science Fiction, is a compilation of almost a decade of research and studying. And, basically, part of the book, and I know you can relate to this, because after reading your book, you did pretty much the same thing. You realize that you're responsible for sharing things that are pretty drastic, that are hard on the ear, so you want people to know that you're not some kind of nut pulling things out of thin air. that you are connected to some kind of core common belief. So I know in your book you establish that in the first half of the book. Mine, I try to do an introduction on it, but what I try to do all the way through the book, my concern was, okay, if I'm going to end up telling people that there are non-human entities in our midst right now steering the world toward Armageddon, steering the world towards a one world government, one world religion, one world economic system, how do I do that without some nut job going into McDonald's, whacking 10 people, and holding up my book saying, I read it in this book, and these people weren't human, so I had to do it. I mean, you got to consider that kind of thing could happen. So in my book, I have actually even waited 2 years before I published it, just agonizing over, did I do it right? Did I get enough disclaimer and balanced information so nobody would get crazy like that? So, but it's been a long haul. I've done this for almost 2 decades now, but it's been, and it's hard. You have to have a thick skin to do this kind of ministry, which I think all of us, as soon as we get into it, soon discover. But it's also been very rewarding.
That's awesome. Yeah, things like that, hearing stuff like that for me, because I haven't started in this too long ago, but that's really inspirational for me to hear that, because I can relate a lot to your testimony and share a lot of similar things in my own, and that's awesome. And I love that you're still going strong with this too. And actually, you just recently posted a blog about a trip that you took back in 2011 entitled Finding the Fortress of Anu. Can you give us some backstory as to what led you to taking this trip and what was the ultimate goal?
Well, that was really a wild trip. It was an extension from some of the work of the late David Flynn. I remember in 2004, we come back from the first 2003 Ancient of Days conference, and he was all excited because there was a crop circle that appeared in England called the Crabwell crop circle, and it was actually it was almost a mocking imitation of his brother's computer company. It showed a gray alien holding up a disk, and his computer company's logo was a gray alien holding a computer chip. So in this disk, Dave and his brother both. Now, Dave's brother, Mark, he works, twin brother as a matter of fact, he works for the government in cyber encryption and, decoding and whatnot. So both of them were, and Dave was the one, he probably was somebody that had a better understanding of the occult mind than anyone else I've ever met anywhere. And he actually saw this world in a form of mathematical formulas. He saw it for a matrix is what it is. And pretty interesting guy. Well, his book, Sedona, The Secret Chronicles of Mars, I can hold it up here. Matter of fact, this book, I guess, is hard to come by anymore, but he gave me a whole case when I had my bookstore down in Roswell. But in his book, he explains a connection that they discovered from the Crabwell crop circle. They noticed that there was an American codex in there, and it had longitude and latitude lines, but it was based on the French prime meridian, not a Greenwich prime meridian. And so, being the mathematical guy that I can't even begin to pretend or understand some of his calculations, he started coming up with dates on coordinates. So for Roswell, New Mexico, he got 104 by 33.3 with using pi, come out with 19.47. Well, 1947. Something would happen in Roswell at those coordinates, as that was the exact location of the crash site. So he started doing it with other places. He had to date pretty much around where Mount Hermon, where the fallen angels first descended, and then the Tower of Babel, then even an event for Jerusalem. Just a lot of different things, and he was seeing a definite pattern. Well, when he was sharing with me about the fact that Mount Hermon, where we assume that because it's not really known for sure, there's 3 different possible locations, but all 3 locations in Baghdad, Iraq, are where the Tower of Babel once stood, and it's basically along the same 33.3 degree line. And then you take it all the way over to the west, and that's 33.3 degree latitude line is where the Roswell crash was. 33, of course, is a number that's the highest. It's supposed to, in occult symbolism, it represents the highest attainable knowledge that a person can reach in this life, and it's also why the Masons have the 33 degree highest level of Masonry, is because that's the highest obtainable knowledge. So there's an occult significance in all of that. and the whole world can almost be read out mathematically in formulas, and that's something that Dave understood that I, I sort of understand, but not to the level or degree that he did. But I noticed that it was, and the one thing that the Lord had told me a long time ago, that everything was going to be done in the same but opposite, that Satan had a plan. Once I understood that everything's being done in the same but opposite, that everything that God did, he was going to duplicate, but it was going to be in a same but opposite pattern. So I noticed that the topography of where Mount Hermon was, and then the measurement of 497 degrees, or 97 miles from the top of Mount Hermon to the base of where the Tower of Babel was, I noticed that especially the Tower of Babel, which is kind of funny because everybody thinks that Babel was some kind of climbing program, yet the Tower of Babel was built in a valley. If you're going to build it for reaching into heaven, you're going to put it on the highest mountain. You're not going to put it in a valley. So reached unto in the Hebrew, it's not even there. It's that they were assuming that that's what it meant, but it should have been probably likened unto. If you look at this, all the words before and after, because there is no real word that says likened unto or reached unto. But based on the words before and after, probably a better one would have been likened unto. It was the pinnacle of occult information and knowledge, and they had contained that in there, believing that someday someone's going to be able to put all the pieces back together. And it was forbidden knowledge, and I think it was the knowledge of the two lies in the Garden of Eden, original lies. You should surely not die, and your eyes will be open, you'll be as gods. So if you look at it, that the two things that Adam and Eve lost was an internal body and an internal environment to live in that eternal body. So Satan's two lies were actually two promises. He promised mankind that eventually in this linear existence that he is going to supply man with an eternal body and an eternal environment according to his way, not God's way. So then we get into the whole idea of a same but opposite. He's going to imitate and duplicate everything that God did, leading up to the same promise, only circumventing God completely. Hey, you don't have to follow that guy and be accountable to him. Follow me, I give you the free and easy, cheap way to do it. Of course, it's a lower class, cheap imitation. It isn't going to last, and that's where the trick is on us. So anyways, in all of that, I noticed that the valley and the two rivers, the plains of Shinar is where the Tower of Babel was built on. The plains of Shinar means the land of two rivers. That's the Tigris and the Euphrates. And where they come together and where the location of Tower of Babel was, I noticed that in Roswell, New Mexico, surrounded by mesas, mountains, and it's in a valley, and it's along two rivers that almost are identical. It's almost like a mirror image, and that's the Pecos River and the Rio Grande. And they come together almost the same point. The dots line up, for the cities in the same point. I'm thinking, man, there's a pattern here, and there's something more going on here. So I'm thinking, okay, if the sons of God first descended upon Mount Hermon, and then 400 and some miles east, they've been made deified as the gods and goddesses through all the kingdoms on the earth. Could it be that this, in the, we know there's a former historical Babylon, but there's a prophesied future Babylon. Could America be that future Babylon, and could this be the reappearance of the same sons of God along the 33.3 degree line? And if it is, and that's their second coming reappearance, then that means, according to scriptures that I already discovered and found, the disembodied spirits we call demons are going to be brought back to health, restoration. They're going to be given bodies again, but this time the bodies fall upon a sword and they're not even wounded, as Joel says. These are immortal bodies that aren't going to be subject to a flood or a death or anything. So I'm thinking, that means, according to Daniel 2:43, where they mingle their seed with men, but they don't cleave one another, even as iron doesn't cleave. Now everybody says, well, see, that proves it's unsuccessful. I'm going, no. The word cleave is tied directly into marriage. It's in Genesis 2nd chapter. It says, a man shall leave father and mother and cleave unto his wife, wherefore they are no longer two flesh but one. So here's the idea that they will mingle their seed, but they won't cleave. It won't be in a marriage situation. It'll be clinical outside of that. The very theme of what alien abduction is all about. So, and then when you study the Nazis and what they were, in Operation Paperclip, what was brought over to the country, a continuation of that same thing, I'm going, oh my gosh, there could be an underground laboratory where they're being restored. Here's their second coming. They come back, they reappear. Now they need to be not deified as gods, but this time flesh and blood. Instead of building a false idols, the scripture goes, eyes have they see not, ears have they hear not. They that make them are like them, talking about these false idols. Well, it's prophesied that there would be an army of idols that would come eventually, and this would be that army of darkness, a literal crossing over. Joel's army, the same one in Revelation 9, it comes out of the bottomless pit. So I'm going, oh my gosh, if they're being genetically manipulated and stored, that means there's a genetics lab underground somewhere in the Arizona desert. I'm going, what does it look like, the topography going 497 miles from Roswell out to the Arizona desert? Gee, you land right on a mountaintop. It looks almost like Mount Hermon. The geography and everything is almost the same. And then I noticed that there was the next nearest city. My ministry partner Dave Ruffino called me up one day and he says, Jim, you'll never guess the closest city to that point that you found in the middle of the desert. And I said, what? He says, Baghdad, Arizona. I said,
wow.
Joe, you're kidding me, man. He says, no, look on a Google map. It's Baghdad, Arizona. And I go, this is too weird. And you know what? The Baghdad, Arizona, you know what mountain range it was on?
What's that?
The Aquarian Mountains.
Oh, wow.
And along the 33-degree line, you have Phoenix, Arizona. You know what Phoenix is all about? Resurrection, the death and resurrection of the Phoenix. Right above it is Sedona, Arizona. That brings into some of Dave's work. Then I realized, my gosh, the whole state is set up like what they call the now I'm forgetting the name of it. It's a template. It's like a card. It looks like almost like a tarot card. It's the Masons template, and it's the way they use icons and names to chart out a story through pictures. And the whole state of New Mexico and Arizona, both. New Mexico is a land of enchantment, and it's all about encounter and new ideas, new things, experiencing something new. Arizona is all about resurrection. Death and resurrection. So, I mean, here we have, the beginnings of a story, a cult style that's starting to read out into something. So I always thought, okay, it would be important. I would love to, because we don't know exactly where the Tower of Babel was. I took a common point between all three possible archaeological sites. And I said, okay, within a 50-mile range, I'm probably close to all of them. So I would love to someday put a plaque out on that mark, so that maybe the future people that could follow up and do more research, maybe they might actually find an opening to this complex or compound. I didn't know that I would necessarily actually find it, but I figured if I at least put that plaque there, sometime in the future, maybe somebody would get a little bit closer to it. So I went out there. That was our main objective, to go out there and post this plaque, kind of like in your face. But the thing is, there's no way at that time in my life I had no money to make this trip or have the equipment or anything, so it was just a pipe dream. And I mentioned this on a radio interview that I had, that someday if I had the money, I'd love to be able to go there and check it out firsthand and see if I could actually find anything. Well, two people heard that. One was a man who wants to remain anonymous in the Netherlands, and he wrote me and says, I tried to give you some money through PayPal, and they wouldn't let me give you that much. So can you give me a bank number and everything? I thought, oh, this is a scam. I'm not giving you no bank number. So I wrote him back, and I said, well, I was thinking, well, there's a way I could test this out. I'll just open up an account in my ministry's name, and if he actually does anything, fine. If it's a scam, well, nothing hurt, because I don't have any money in there anyway. So I did that, and next thing you know, I had $4,000 deposited into my account so that I could buy all the equipment, hire all the people that I needed to take the trip, and I was going. Now, the only other thing I said, now, I'll know it's really the Lord, because I know enough from living in New Mexico that the desert is, if you're not familiar with the territory or know how to live in the desert, in that remote area, you're putting yourself in possible danger, so you better know how to survive. So I thought, I need somebody as a guide. So I mentioned that at another radio show, and the next thing you know, a guy who is a herpetologist, which is a scientist, he actually wasn't a scientist, but he was a guy that hunted down reptiles and sold them on the market and everything. I didn't know it was a black market then, but I found that out later. But anyways, he volunteered. He says, I know the Arizona desert like the back of my hand. I'll take you wherever you need to go. I don't want any money for it. It'd be my honor to do it and to help you out. So I thought, oh, wow, this has got to be you, Lord. This is cool. So everything was all laid out. So, we had no other question than let's do our homework and see what we can find. So I figured I wanted to stop at Sedona. I wanted to stop at all these other key cities. There was Prescott, and that's just another story in itself. Yes, it's related to the Bushes, and yes, they're related to this whole story too. But Chuck Missler, in his book, and it really impressed me on this, or not, I don't even think it was in his book, it was on one of his videos or speaking engagement. He took the 10 generations and the names of from Adam to Noah, and then took and columnized them, and then took the Hebrew meaning for each name, and it read out the gospel in a nutshell. And so I realized, now that's a biblical, what they call a sod. There's the way the Hebrew mind wrote the Bible, there was 4 levels of interpretation that they used, and one of them, the most encrypted, was the sod, that there would be a message within a message. So I thought, if the beginning of Babel, with the 5 cities that are mentioned, I wonder what happened if I took those 5 cities and then and read it out. I wonder if that could actually tell me anything or say anything. So I did the same thing. I columnized them out, and I looked up all the names, and this is what I came out with. It said Babel means confusion by mixing, drawn out length to prolong life, a fortress of Anu hidden, all of them completed in a wide open place, split open gate in the land of 2 rivers.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what I came up with. I'm not going, oh my gosh, this is not chance. This is now again, you can go back and look in a interlinear, or a lexicon, and it's long and involved, but that can be the possible, what it could be saying. And of course, I'm looking preconditioned, looking for this anyway to see if there's any kind of clue. So I put all this together. Can I absolutely say that that's what it says? No, I can't prove it. But it sure is darn interesting if I'm right. It just hits a nail right on the head. And so that's where the name, the Fortress of Anu, came from. Anu being the Sumerian god for the god that created all the other gods, the god of the underworld. And of course, when you follow that same name, and we know this name from his association to Osiris and Isis, that Anu is also Anubis in the Egyptian group of gods. He was the god of the underworld and resurrection. Then he was he was Hermes in the Greek collection of gods. He was the healer and the restorer, and then he was Mercury in the Roman, which was the swift messenger of commerce and trade, and also healing and restoration. So we get some themes going through all the way through on all of that. And I know that from my work on working with some of the glean technology we got from the Nazis, and how they got some of theirs was through their occult understanding. They saw a lot of these symbols and myths as being in physics that are encrypted in it. So they looked at the symbol, the medical staff symbol that we have. They looked at it, which was Hermes' staff, which was also held by Mercury, and this is how the Nazi mind went. They said, if we take the substance of Mercury and put it into a vortex implosion from Victor Schauberg's understandings, it should produce an electrical form of power that'll produce a new form of flight. This is exactly what they worked on that produced anti-gravity circular disc aircraft. Now it gets weird too, because Mercury seems to be also the important key element into the mythical Philosopher's Stone. And that it was a search, of course, in the medieval ages, we know of it as being, the alchemists that were trying to turn lead into gold. But I really think that was more of a myth to keep them from being killed for what they were really trying to find was eternal life. But as long as they told the church that they were turning lead into gold, there was something of a viable interest that would keep them alive and keep them allowed to keep researching and study. But lead being symbolic of the earth-laden mortal life, and then gold meaning deity or a godlike eternal life. It was really the quest for an elixir that would produce eternal life. And so all the elements that were in there were actually all the elements that existed in Arizona, which is just kind of, again, really creepy weird. In Baghdad, Arizona, the only thing they had going for them was a huge copper mine. And a copper mine, of course, Steve Quayle knows the association with the Nephilim, the giants, and copper. So, again, it's just all these coincidences just were overwhelming. So we just wanted to go out there in person and see what we could find. Now, I have to say that, we didn't actually find the place. The one most important place, Yellow Medicine Butte, is where I determined would probably be on top of there, would be the opening to this complex, if there was any kind of opening at all. The one place that I wanted to go, the one place we didn't go. And our guide had made a mistake, and I want to believe him that he made a mistake. And this is what's sad, you know, and this is when you get into the conspiracy part. You don't know who to trust or what to trust. Once we got out on our trip, we come to find out that he was in the witness protection program because he was a poacher that got busted. and he was probably he was still probably on the government's payroll. The one place we wanted to go, he messed up and we couldn't get there, and we didn't go. And we were pressed for time. We went to so many different places, globetrotting all around through the desert. We didn't get there. Our main important thing was putting that plaque down, and once we accomplished that, I think that was, you know, something that was important. And I felt to release it, we had done what we were supposed to. I thought the extra frosting on the cake would be if we actually went there and maybe found the opening, but then I sometimes think back that if we found it, we would have had an accident on the way home and never gotten home and probably would have never heard of it again. So it just wasn't the right time. But all through this trip, I think the one thing that the Lord kind of shared or showed us, when we were, the most exciting part of the trip was going to Sedona, Arizona, where, you know, Sedona, Arizona is to the New Age what Roswell is to the UFO alien thing. It's like the center for everything occult, Eastern mysticism. It's the New Age capital of the world, and people go there from all over the world. All your major iconic figures that are, you know, the top psychics and the New Age gurus and who have written books and everything, they have either their summer or their permanent residence in Sedona, Arizona. It was a former art community, so it's always been kind of an upscale neighborhood. I certainly couldn't afford to live there for any length of time unless my book became a million seller or something. But it was a place where, boy, the Lord was needed. I mean, being that they had so much money to put behind their resources, they made a very elaborate series. The Sedona isn't like one basic downtown area. It's a bunch of enclaves of little towns created almost like a Pueblo village or a European villa with a central fountain, all kinds of little shops. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. What they've done is they've repackaged Satan's everything occult, wicked, and evil. They repackaged it and made it bright, sunny, shiny, gleaming, beautiful little gem so that it entices everybody from all over the world. But everybody goes there with all kinds of questions. And knowing what we know, all of us know, about Genesis 6 and how that changes our whole perspective on everything else, we got answers that most of the church and most people don't have. And to go there and to be able to share this with so many people that are hungry and searching, that was the most exciting part of our trip, being able to share Jesus with people. Traipsing out through the desert and looking for mysteries, that was fun in its own way. But the thing that was the most uplifting, the thing that was the most fulfilling, was sharing Jesus with all these people that needed to know him. And so through our whole trip and everything, when all was said and done, that is actually what helped me get a redirection of my own ministry to refocus back on making this all basically evangelistic. The searching and everything was interesting. I think we did what we were supposed to. I regretfully don't know. I don't want to falsely accuse this guy that volunteered to traipse us through. I think, you know, regardless of whether, now this is going to sound funny, but Christians will get this. I don't care if he was working for the government. I like the guy. I like him. He's a nice guy. And so I'll never say anything bad about him. If he was just on the payroll and doing his job, I'm sure that he didn't get the full picture. And if he knew everything was really going on, he probably wouldn't do anything. But maybe he's forced to. I don't know, but I'm not going to hold anything against him, even if I think he is. And if he isn't, and gosh, I hope he forgives me. I don't want to falsely accuse him, but he was just doing his job, and I understand it. And the only reason I really, you know, am totally convinced, maybe not the mistake that we couldn't find Yellow Medicine Butte or get on top of it. That was one thing, but at the very end of the trip, we were going to split ways. He was going to go up to Phoenix. We were going to go down further to look at some petroglyphs and a few things, and then go back to Superstition Mountains. I didn't know that we probably wouldn't have time to go up into the mountains. That's going to be a whole trip. You and some other younger people should go to, but that's a weird place. But before we split our ways, he pulled over to the road, called some friends, said he had to, get a hold of him and hook up with him, and he didn't want to talk and drive at the same time, and I think that's pretty wise. I don't do that myself. So we did, but then he said he wanted to go to one more place before he left. He says he wanted to stop by this National Guard Armory. I'm going, what the heck? I don't want to go to the National Guard Armory. There's nothing there for me. It's got nothing to do with a trip. The next thing I know, now I was in the military. I know what the bases are like, even a National Guard Armory during wartime. They're heavily guarded. You just don't go on a National Guard Armory base. It doesn't happen. There's guns and all kinds of cool things there, and they're not going to let people go just there from anywhere during wartime. We went right through, before I could even know what was going on, we were already inside the base. Inside of it. It's like,
oh, wow.
What is going on here? We weren't stopped. We weren't, challenged or anything. And before I kept telling, I think it was my son driving, and I kept telling him, turn around, get out of it. We don't need to be here. But at the same time, I got my camera out the window. I'm still taking pictures because I was taking pictures before we went into it. Just taking, some pretty pictures of desert and everything. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm inviting myself to get busted here. I put the camera away. But I noticed that by the time we had even a chance to want to turn around, we had already turned around and we were in front of the headquarters, and we went. I couldn't go any faster than the guy that was ahead of me, who was our guide, and he was going real slow by the headquarters, and then he sped up and went out. I realized, oh my God, we had just been profiled. That was the whole purpose. That's why we got on the base and we weren't challenged and stopped or anything. They were probably filming us.
Wow.
Oh, that's weird. So when I got back home, all three of us, Eric Smith and my youngest son, David, all three of us, all hell broke loose in our lives. All kinds of personal weird stuff happened. So we knew we stepped on Satan's toes, and he wasn't too happy about it. But then it got to be beyond that. I had a hard drive crash on my computer. All my notes and everything that I had studied on my whole trip, I lost. Jesus saved, but I didn't, and I didn't save any of it, so I lost it all. When the 3.5 hours of filming that I did on my video camera, the SD chip got fried in my computer. No, nothing happened to my computer. It wasn't near sunlight. It was in a dark place. My son, the computer expert, he looked at it and he said, "Dad, I can't explain to you how this happened. It shouldn't have happened. It doesn't make any sense." So I said, "Okay, Lord, you're trying to, you're slowing me down here. You're trying to show me something. What next going on?" It wasn't until almost 2 years later that I posted anything about our trip. I just had to hear from the Lord first. I had to know that his timing was right and everything. One of the things he shared with me too is that, so many times Satan can have all these dots connected, and half the time they don't lead anywhere. It's just a waste of time and a diversion to keep us busy looking for mysteries and not doing the work and the commission, which is to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So I don't think I was a victim of that, though. I do think that there was something there, but it's just not in its time. Okay, like he sat me down and said, "Jim, okay, so what if you found it? There's a certain amount of evil that has to be finished and done, as horrible as it is. And if you found it, what would your inclination? You're going to storm it? You're 62 years old. You're not in very good health, and you didn't even have a pistol there with you. You didn't have anything. What are you going to beat him with a stick? What are you going to do? You're going to gather an army up together and make try to intrude in it? You're going against my will. This has to happen. This has to be. So I'm not going to let you or anyone else find it until I'm ready to let them find it. So there's going to come a time where we're going to need to know, but it wasn't for me to know at that time. And that's one thing, that I understood. So it made me realize that any future trips that I might take to seek out, because I was going to do one on the Nephilim, I was going to do one, I had all this stuff on. Of course, I've shared with you the things that I found out in Stevensville. I think is that going to be part 2? Or no?
You can go ahead and talk about it now if you want.
Oh, do we have any time, or how much time do I have to do that?
Oh, sure, yeah, go for it. We've been talking for about 45 minutes, so yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting. The 2 main trips that I had almost cover the 2 lies that are in the Garden of Eden. One, you shall surely not die. Well, the whole trip about looking for the Fortress of Anu was a genetics lab that was going to bring back these things. Probably what Tom Horn and a lot of them have been talking about for a long time, about the transhumanism, the nanobot technology, cloning. I always saw the cloning part. I didn't see the the transhumanism thing until the technology started to develop back in the 96. Nobody knew about that because we hadn't mapped the human genome yet. Now all these things are a possibility, and I think all of this technology, even artificial intelligence, the ability to upload or download a person's consciousness into another body, that's not science fiction anymore. We can do that, and we're working on it already. This is the Frankenstein kind of stuff that is going to bring a dead leader back to life from death. He's going to be the firstborn of his kind, which means that same technology is going to be utilized to bring back the disembodied spirits into a flesh and bone body, but not one that's going to die this time. It's going to be immortal. And then I think it's going to be offered to whosoever will accept it. Will have to deny the Christ of the Bible and accept this coming cosmic Christ. So it'll be science and technology, which is most people's God now anyway. And I don't believe that the mark is necessarily an RFID chip. It'll probably be this glorified body that we're all promised anyway, with a phony Christ giving a phony gospel. So that's just my potential of how I see that. And it's actually providing that, hey, you should surely not die. Here's a way out to have eternal life, and you don't have to be accountable to God. Now, here's a way that your eyes can be open. You can be all-present, all-knowing, and think you're all-powerful, because I'm going to give you the ability to do that. What would that be? To be able to, let's say for the nervous, you can say travel interdimensionally. For the not-so-nervous, the ability to manipulate time, space and time, to travel it. And that causes a ton of problems and difficulties, but I find that the Bible solved each problem, chapter, text, and verse in Scripture. I've got a series posted on YouTube on time travel, 4 parts, that explain from the Word of God how all of the grandfather paradox, all of this stuff has already been provided and taken care of by God, but He's allowing this to be part of the end time delusion. And you might think the worst people in all history, I believe, are the ones that discovered this ability. And so you think, okay, now how could they be given that and not be running around like a loose cannon, you know, supplying the American Indians with AK-47s and Sherman tanks, so as soon as the white Europeans come by, they get blown away. So that isn't going to happen. Or, you know, if Satan could finally go back and undo it and stops himself from putting Jesus on the cross, well, that can't happen. It won't happen. Things are only going to happen once, and it's going to be according to God's way. And if you try to change it, all you're going to do is end up fulfilling His ultimate way anyway. You'll just be an object of doing the very opposite of what you're intending on doing. But my dilemma in all this, when I first discovered it, was, okay, you're going to tell me, Lord, that the worst people in all of history had the ability to travel time, and what kept them from doing all kinds of crazy stuff? And he says, I got up during a time of fasting and praying, 4 o'clock in the morning, I got my little wake-up call, and the Lord said, Jim, you've always wondered why I let evil go so far. And I'm saying, well, yeah, you know, the Antichrist stands in a temple proclaiming himself as God, believing in no God, and demanding worship as God, and everybody gets their head lopped off. Yeah, it seems kind of like they won. And he says, that's my point. I let them think that they're going to win someday. They're going to see a time when time will be no more. And gosh, that's in Revelation 13:10. Linear time as we know it, sometime during the tribulation, is going to come to an end. And when we see ourselves being lined up to the center of the galaxy, the 2012 Mayan thing, I knew nothing was going to happen then, but it might be lining us up for an effect somewhere down the future. There's an electromagnetic grid that's alluded to being around the Earth. It was originally to protect the Earth, and now I think it keeps us bound in a linear timed existence, which was not what we were intended for. And I truly think that Satan, using HARP and maybe Blue Beam and some other technologies that he's given to man, are going to be able to throw this out of kilter and tweak what is maybe going to naturally happen anyway. The kingdom's going to come. We know that time's going to be no more, but he's going to try to adjust it and tweak it out before the real events happen, to either fool everybody or to create, a kind of an eternal state along with an eternal body. So that's what I'm getting into all of that about. That's what Stevensville was all about, the Stevensville sightings. And it was funny how I even got invited to that. I had a friend from Fort Worth, Texas. He was praying about his wife, who she had had an abduction experience, and he, of course, didn't know much about the whole UFO alien thing, so he started praying, and the Lord gave him Zechariah 5th chapter, and he's reading it. He says, well, Lord, I don't understand how this has got to do with my wife's abduction thing. And this is what the Lord told him. He says, go to Roswell this year, it was 2007, in the summer, and there'll be somebody there that will be able to explain it to you. So he went to Roswell, the first person he came to was Tom Horn, and he asked Tom, he says, Tom was speaking at a different thing. In 2007, I was leaving Roswell. I knew that I hadn't done much to try to, preach to the church or try to wake them up, because they flat out rejected my ministry and everything that I had. And they're just a microcosm of the rest of society. So, they didn't want to hear it. It'd be like, a Jewish prophet going to a Jewish pig farmer. You just kind of ruin their whole operation. And so in Roswell, the UFO alien thing, there's major stores selling merchandise and everything, and they perpetuate this whole crash thing, and everybody makes a lot of money, and there's a lot of tithing, so the churches don't want to hear it because some of their main leaders are ones that own some of these stores. So it's a real conflict of interest and just a lot of weirdness. So I wasn't real popular in that respect, and I hadn't done much. The Lord had already told me that I was going to go back to Detroit. And I was kind of heartbroken about that. I loved my little store and all the people that I was able to share and help, but there were family reasons and other reasons the Lord wanted us to go back. We had spent 4 years there. We did our time, and now it's time to go back home. So I felt, I had to do something to reach out to the people. And I thought, Lord, there's got to be something in your word that pertains to Roswell. This is such a global impact on the whole world. There's just got to be something there that I can show these people in Roswell to show the importance of standing in the gap to this big lie. Well, at the same time as that was going on was the time when Dave Flynn was establishing the location for the actual crash in Corona, and on this 33.3 degree line, this measurement. And somebody had emailed me just before. I wasn't able to go to the event, but my friends were all there. I had to work that day, so they were there doing it. And then about a year later, my friends sent me a DVD on the event. They blew the shofar, rededicated Roswell back to the Lord, and ever since then, for 7 years, we had a Christian presence standing in the gap to the whole Roswell alien stuff. So at the same time, I just got this in the mail, and I was anxious to watch the whole proceedings. Somebody had emailed me and asked me about Zechariah 5th chapter. So I looked at it real quick, like to see if I could give them an answer, and I'm reading about this woman in the epoch, a basket and a cover of a shiny metallic disc that was the cover over her, and of course she was the whore of Babylon, the false religion. It says that the whole purpose of this woman was to be taken into the land of two rivers, where she would have a firm foundation, and that by this cover of this silver disc, all the nations would be deceived. I'm going, wow, that's pretty heavy, this basket. I'm thinking, well, I looked up basket, and that meant had two meanings. It was a measurement in general, or it was a specific basket that was made to measure grain. So I looked at the Roswell thing, blowing the shofar and from Dave Flynn and everything, and then a light bulb went off. Measurement. A woman in a measurement. The false religion in the plains of Shinar. 33.3 degrees, the same line as the plains of Shinar, and Old Babylon is New Babylon. You're right, this is it. This is the Roswell crash. Now it's what they call a rule of duplicity. At the time of the prophet, it was talking about the shekel, which was a round, flat, silvery, metallic object, and that monetary system controlled and manipulated the entire world, and by the whole world they were deceived by that. But it has a rule of duplicity. It had an end-time play in the New Babylon, which was an entirely different thing, and that round silvery disc was literally a round silvery disc, a UFO, the whole UFO crash. Everything tied right in perfect. So I figured before I left Roswell, I'm going to have my own convention, and I will mainly target and all the pastors in Roswell and all the Christians to see if I can't get them. Well, I rented a room out that could hold 67 or 65 people. I had 67 people come. Now, for kind of a convention like that, that was big. I was elated. I mean, I had full capacity, and I think even the other conventions usually only got an average attention, attendance of maybe 30 to maybe 80. 150 in 2009 was the biggest I had ever seen. So, it was really good. Well, it was at that convention that my friend from Fort Worth came, and then the first person he says, "Do you know anybody that knows anything about Zechariah 5 and Roswell?" And I guess it shocked Tom. And he says, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a guy, Jim Wilhelmsen, right down the road. He's given a speech on that very topic." So he went. I met him. fantastic guy. He invited me the next year. That was 2007. 2008 is when the flap sightings in Stevensville, Texas, called the Stevensville Lights, took place. In 2009, he called me and asked me if I would come and help and speak, at a convention, set up a speaking engagement, talk to his church. And he also wanted me to talk more, with he and his wife about her experience. They kind of resolved it, but she was still struggling through, wondering. Now they're experienced ministers. They've been in deliverance. She realized, oh my gosh, there's open doors. Why did this happen to me? So she was starting to beat herself up with false guilt. So Romans 8:28, all things working together for good. I went down there and spoke. I got to minister with her. We got a total closing of the door, a total end of everything. But her life was pretty colorful. Her father was a part of Project Blue Book. He was an Air Force intelligence officer investigating all this stuff. And I really think that there was a kind of a generational thing that was creeping into her life, and that was part of it. There was some other things too that I really can't get into, but anyways, when I was down there, he asked me, he says, you remember the Stevensville Lights sightings and everything that happened last year? And I said, yeah, I sure do, because there's a couple of elements that stood out on me, and something isn't right because nobody's saying anything about it. He says, well, I went to high school with most of those guys. You want me to take you around? You can talk to some of them. And I said, yeah, especially Leroy Gayton, the guy that, the police chief down at Erath County. Can you hook me up and talk? I want to talk to him. I need to really talk to him. He says, yeah, see what I can do. So he did, and we went down there, and I talked to Officer Gayton. And it was interesting because, see, he and several others had said that in the midst of, every UFO type that's ever been seen was seen during the flap sightings. There was a shiny circular disc aircraft with black triangles. There was the mile-long cigar-shaped motherships. And then something else that piqued my interest that has never been seen except one other place. Several people had said, and Leroy Gayton was one of them, that they saw bell-shaped objects, two of them, encased in like a reddish, like a force field around them. And I wanted to zero in on that. What exactly did you see? So I asked him, I said, I drew a picture of the bell. It was the Die Glocke, the Nazi time travel project. And I said, did it look like that? And he says, that's exactly what it looked like. Yeah, that's it. He says, I've got a video on them too. I said, you got what? He says, yeah, I took a video of them. And I said, now, is it just like two fuzzy dots, or can you clearly see the bell-shaped eye? He says, oh, no, they're clear. You can see the bell-shaped objects inside, and you can see the the reddish glow, because they kept glowing real bright, and then they'd go dull, and when they were dull, you could see the bell-shaped objects in them. And so I said, so tell me what happened. So, because I'd heard him say that he saw other things too, and so the whole scenario, what he saw first was these little wiggly, squiggly lights in the sky. Then he saw these two orbs with the bell-shaped objects in them. Then he saw jets chasing after him, and then a few days later, he saw these mile-wide ships that were going, almost barely moving, like they were scanning the area. And so I prayed and I asked the Lord, what in the heck is going on? Now, MUFON was down here. They said that the squiggly lights were just some metaphysical apparition. It had nothing to do with the UFO sightings. I'm going, no, they're all connected. Come on, man. There's no way. So here's what the Lord told me. Now, I shared this with a few colleagues back when I first discovered it, and they thought I was just Fruit Loop nuts. This just doesn't make sense. And most of them still think I'm loopy on this part. I can't help it. I'm sorry. My word says that if I go to God and ask Him, He's going to show me things that I don't understand, that I have no way of understanding. I knew about Mercury and what the Nazis were working on before I ever heard it official through any channels, because God told me. And I didn't say anything about it for the first year because I thought it was too weird sounding myself. Now I've learned to just as soon as I find it, spit it out. I don't care if people laugh at me or not. I've learned to know and trust when the Lord speaks to me. He said, Jim, you saw those squiggly lights there. You were looking at a catastrophe. He says, remember when you were a kid and you'd skip a rock on the top of a lake and it would jump the water? He said, the reason the occult myths are part of a physics that they're understanding, that it was always important to find the center location to control the physical from the spiritual. So a shaman in Africa, a medicine man in Mithram, when they were setting up a temple, whatever they wanted to control in the physical world, they would find the central location point, and they would set their temple up there. Usually these points were at intersecting ley lines too. So it's, you know, there's, again, it was a simple mathematics formula of being in the right time in the right place. They said that being in the center is also important when you're breaching space-time. You have to be in the center of the event horizon in the slipstream. He says what happened was, and this is what he told me, and I didn't have any way. Now, I already sensed and knew. I made the connection with the Nazi Bell. The only other time that anything had ever been seen that looked like that was in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965. Something crashed. It looked like an acorn. It had runic symbols all along the bottom, just like the two that were mentioned in Stevensville. When they captured it, it was almost like they, you know, it wasn't like Roswell. They anticipated and had a contingency plan to recoup this thing. Within an hour, all the witnesses were silenced. The thing was put on a 2.5 deuce, tarped over, and taken out of there. And,
oh, wow.
you know, a non-event. So in 2008, 2 more are seen. And every type of UFO that we've ever seen is out looking for it. That's what it was all about. Now, what the Lord told me was that some people had escaped the fall of the Reich in 1945. And now this I learned just from my own research, that at the end of the war, we let the Russians go into Berlin to be the conquering heroes because we had some more important places to go. And one of them was in Prague, where there was a research and development compound equal to what Area 51 would be. They were working on the atomic bomb. We wanted to make sure what the Germans had in the way of their knowledge on the atomic bomb, because we were still working on the Manhattan Project of our own. So we sent Panton clear across, you know, cutting across and ignoring Berlin, which he was kind of ticked off about, but we wanted him to go into this compound and get whatever there was there. Now, Hitler put out an assassination on all the people that were working at the compound to eliminate everybody and destroy all evidence. He chose Dr. Hans Kammler, who was like the head of all Nazi black ops operations, who also was an engineer, to be in charge of this. Well, most of the people were executed, but some of them, including Hans Kammler, escaped right off the pages of history, never to be found. It was known that he was preparing to defect to the Allies to surrender, because the Russians were definitely going to be unmerciful to them. Whoever they caught, they were going to kill. So his thing, we know he was preparing to escape to the Allies, to America. So they found the testing harness to this diglocka. They found all the blueprints, drawings, and other specs and everything, but no actual objects were found. What the Lord told me was that they had escaped successfully in 1945, 3 of them. They went through a wormhole, they collided with each other, and they skidded off the sides. And so when you saw those crazy lights, what you were seeing was those things phasing in and out of space-time, skidding across like a rock on the water. And
oh, wow.
One of them shot out in Kecksburg in 1965, and the other 2 in Stevensville, Texas in 2008. Now, I know that sounds crazy, and for a long time people thought I was a little loopy on this, until I think in a secular way, and I got a chance to meet him and talk to him about 3 hours in my store in Roswell. Jim Mars is probably one of the most articulate researchers that I know. He's very methodical in his approach, excellent notes. I mean, documents everything that he says. On one of the Ancient Alien programs, he said everything that I had been saying. Because he said it, then all of a sudden, and on TV, then it's validated. Then everybody is going, oh, maybe Wilhelmsen isn't so crazy. He told the people, now of course they're calling them aliens, that the Nazis got their technology from aliens. We know it as the fallen angels, just as prophesied in the Bible. And that, in his opinion, after doing research in Germany himself, he was pretty determined that Hans Kammler had escaped Nazi Germany in one of the Bells and escaped either to another world or a different time. And I'm going, thank you, man, because you just helped confirm what I've been saying all along. He did. And that's what Stevensville Lights was all about. It was about a cover-up for the most valuable war booty that we could find. Was the guy that actually had, it took us 60 years to back engineer most of the technology that they already had. And so now this guy reappearing, for him, was probably just a matter of days or hours, and here he is over at Stevensville, Texas in 2008. So everybody was looking for him. Whatever remains in the Schwabenland and Base 211 in the Antarctic, our own gleaned technology, maybe even the fallen ones, everybody's looking for this guy. And who found him? I don't know, which that'll still remain. But I knew that after that, now here's the thing, I'm not a better, more experienced researcher than MUFON. MUFON's researchers are far more experienced than I am. The UFO hunters from the television program, they were in Stevensville, Texas in 2008. MUFON was there in 2008. Many other highly experienced, reputable UFO investigators poured into Stevensville, Texas. I didn't discover the Nazi bell or the bell-shaped objects, and they didn't. They all know. They know it's there. They know what they heard, testimonies they heard, but nobody's saying anything.
Wow, why do you think that is?
Well, because they're covering it up, and they're going to put a political twist on it, and I'm beginning to see it happen. Just recently, we were told, Edward Snowden had told the Iranians that tall white Caucasians were actually running America, that were aliens.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Well, there's your Nordics right there. And I had always been saying that somehow those aliens are going to be connected with constitutional Americans, conservatives, and Christians. And there's already been a book by Nick Redfern. That's what I'm looking for, because I had it around here somewhere. His book was written with this Collins elite, who are supposed to be a group of Christians working to help keep this covered up. We know about the paperclip scientists, the Nazis that come over here. They ended up integrating themselves into the highest levels of our government, in academia, and in industry. So there's still a presence here. I mean, we allowed a fifth column of a Fourth Reich to start flourishing in America. So all that evidence is there. Why it points or how it points to Christians is totally absurd and ridiculous. I mean, this Collins elite, their behavior, their actions, no born-again Christian on this earth would think that they had to help God bring in the second coming of Christ and do it with, deception and try to utilize the powers of darkness. It's just ridiculous. So whoever this group is, if they even exist at all, they're certainly not Christians. Now, they seek out people that are doing stuff like me, and I've been doing it probably longer than most people, so I've never heard of them. They've never approached me on anything. So I just don't think that, that even, if anything, it's a readjustment and a ruse, as the Ancient of Days actually introduced all of the biblical perspective answers for UFOs and aliens to the secular, and the secular has been backpedaling and readjusting themselves to refute the things that we're saying, because it's diametrically opposed to their findings. So this is maybe just one of the pieces to the chess game, or one of the plays, where they're trying to do a check on us and our material. So the reason why, I think, is because they are not letting the public know, because they're going to use this against us at their right time and right place. It's the only thing I can think of. When I asked Leroy Gayton about the tape he had, he said he'd give me a copy. He says, but I gave the tape to Angela Joyner. She was the newspaper woman who was really stayed on this whole topic of the sightings and everything, and was persistent in following through on it. So she had been given the tape, and then he told me, Leroy Gayton told me, he says, and Angela Joyner gave it to Linda Moulton Howe. Well, Linda Moulton Howe is the cattle slaughtering expert gal, and she's also, I've met her a couple of times, and I like to think that I usually can always get a word in edgewise to something that needs to be said, especially about the Lord. I couldn't get a word in edgewise with her. She is an apostle to the New Age. She just proclaims and sings the praises of Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky. I mean, she's hardcore New Ager. I mean, this agenda is her heart, her life, her future, and she doesn't think too fondly of Christians, because they're diametrically opposed to her. And so she was given the tape. And I looked at Leroy and I said, please tell me you made a copy. And he says, no. I said, you know what, Leroy, you're never going to see that tape again. You'll never see it. It's gone. So I wrote her. I asked her about it. She didn't answer me. My ministry partner, Dave Ruffino, wrote her, and she says, well, I don't see why you're getting all upset over it. It's just a film of two fuzzy blobs. Doesn't show anything. Okay, right. Well, now, I like to think that by the Spirit of God, I have discernment, and I know people. I can feel and sense their heart. When I talked to Leroy, I knew that I was talking to a man of integrity. I knew I was talking to a man that loved his family, loved his country, was honorable to his job. Recently on Alien Mysteries, he was on a program and he was interviewed, and he said that he had taken a video film of the two orbs, didn't mention anything about bells, And he said, and when he played it back, it was just two fuzzy dots that it looked like they were interfered electronically, but you couldn't tell anything or see anything. Now, he's not a liar. I just know that's not in his character. He was approached and told to shut up and change his story. I know he was. And nobody is mentioning anything about a bell-shaped anything in Stevensville, Texas. They're just not mentioning it all, hoping that it'll go away. But I've got the original news broadcast from 2008 where 4 people say that they saw a bell-shaped object. I didn't record Leroy Gayton when I interviewed him because I knew that this was something that was dangerous, and I didn't want to implicate him or jeopardize him. I've backed off from this completely now. There's a Hollywood film thing that was making a documentary, went to Stevensville, ran into some, pretty scary things, and I warned him. I said, you need to back off and get away from this. This is probably the biggest secret that America has, and they'll kill for it. I think you just need to you're over your head. I'm over my head. I need to just go away and get away from it. Now, it's all about time travel. It's all about a technology that I'm sure we've been working on and haven't been able to really perfect, and we're wanting to find out. And unfortunately, the enemy has. So my first logical thing, Josh, and when I heard this is, oh, come on. How in the heck are they, this can't happen. How can you give a mad, crazy dog, the Nazis, the ability to travel time, and how come they didn't mess up the whole timeline? And that's when I got that 4 o'clock in the morning thing, and the Lord said, you wondered why I let everything go so far. And I said, yeah, it looks like you won. I said, that's my point, Jim. I made them think that they won. When they traveled, the first time they breached the space-time continuum, they went into the future. They saw their leader as the victor, standing in the temple declaring himself as God, and it looked like they won. They're not going to go beyond that point because they know that linear time is going to end, so somehow there's a brick wall there, but they saw themselves as winning. Being that it was the future, in order to see that end game fulfilled, now they have a blueprint, a pattern, a drawing, a recipe. They can't deviate from it one little bit, because if they do, it changes what they saw. Their only hope is in what they saw. So now, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, there's a certain role that they have to play out. Certain things they can do, certain things they can't do. And so they're locked into it. And that's God's control. And I think it's so cool that he could do it that way. But even hearing me now, it doesn't matter. They know. And they know they're locked into it. This is their only hope. They're probably laughing at me, saying, sucker, we've seen the end and we know. And I've gone, sucker, I've read Revelation 19 and I know that you lose and we win. So
absolutely.
So now, this is the other crazy thing, and I've got it on my one video. It's in part 3, I think it is, of my video series on time travel. And in doing some more research and studying, I came across a movie that was made in 1963 called The Yesterday Machine. I looked at it and I'm going, okay, this is a bad, I pinch myself. Maybe I'll wake up. I'm in a bad Twilight Zone episode. I can't believe I'm looking at this movie. Made in 1963, 2 years before Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. The movie's called The Yesterday Machine. This reporter sent out to investigate some kid that was shot with a musket ball, and this Confederate hat was left. Well, he's thinking, okay, these are, Civil War impersonators, playing out, recreating history or something, and he accidentally got shot. So that's what he's looking for. Then they find out that the hat that was left behind was a hat that shouldn't even exist because it was officially made by a company in 1863, but they got burned out before the end of the war, and so this shouldn't even exist anymore, and it was authentic, and it was like brand new. The musket ball was taken out, was exactly from the Civil War, and so, he's starting to freak out. So he goes to the police chief. Guess what city this is all happening in?
What's that?
Stevensville, Texas.
Oh, wow.
So he goes to the police chief. And the police chief has the most incriminating evidence. He says, this reminds me of at the end of the World War II, we overran this complex in Germany, and they were working on time travel. He says, so what, you're trying to tell me that this was real? And how can I explain that? And I'm thinking, boy, welcome to my world. How are you going to explain? He says, well, I'm not saying you can explain it. I'm just saying this is what it could be. So the story goes on. There's an escaped Nazi working underground in Stevensville, Texas, on a time travel project, and at the very end, he meets this guy. He got caught by him, and of course, he escapes and gets him caught instead. But this guy is talking about how they didn't have enough time to finish everything, but now they've controlled time, and now he's in this frantic rage. He's going eternity, immortality, what we've always wished for. Now we won't have a Reich that'll last for 1,000 years. It'll last forever, and because now time is our weapon and everything. So it ends, with almost like the whole agenda. It's just like, wow, weird. Now, what are the chances? I mean, I can't explain the movie. It happened. It was made in 1963. I can't explain it. I don't even want to go there and try to explain it, but it just shows me that we're dealing with an enemy that is capable of being outside of time. And that's why, all the more reason why we have to realize and stick to the promises of God, that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Whether they can manipulate time and travel through it and plant, how can you turn a $1 bill into the two towers burning and all this other stuff? Well, because time has been manipulated all throughout our time scale by people that are not bound by time. We look at it and go, oh my gosh, oh wow, they've always been here, and they've planted all these things all the way along. No, it's part of the end time delusion. Why do you have paintings of the baptism of Jesus in 1701? You got a flying saucer over Jesus instead of a dove. This is all corrupted evidence that's been planted all throughout time to convince us of an endgame lie. And time is an important missing element of that. Once we understand that, a lot of this other ancient alien crap fits in for what it really is, a big ruse. Smoke and mirrors, that's all it is. As long as we're thinking linear, Satan is happy, because then we don't get it. When we think outside of time, we go, okay, wow, all right. What is so secret about the secret societies? They know this. They're playing on a different level. They've already got the benefits, I think, of those two lies. That they surely shall not die, and they'll be like gods. Their eyes will be open. They'll be able to travel anywhere they want and place everything they want. But you know what? They're still locked into the creator of all things. It's still completely controlled by him. And that's where I think our confidence is, knowing all we got to do is look in Revelation's 19th chapter, man. We win, they lose. Bottom line, that's it.
Absolutely. So man, we're going to have to do like a whole show on time travel one of these days, because that's fascinating to me, and I know there's so many different avenues we could take that in, and unfortunately we don't have the time for this episode. But I wanted to ask if there's somebody listening that might be having problems with abductions or even just seeing sightings of UFOs. As Christians, how are we supposed to respond to that, and what do we do if we find out that, or if we find ourselves being approached by these things?
Well, the first thing you do, no matter what, is to rebuke it in the name of Jesus. Just to be on the safe side. If it's just nothing but a mental aberration, which sometimes they are, it'll blink out and be gone right then and there. If it's literal, physical, real, it may not. But you still have the ability to be in control by using and standing on the name of Jesus Christ. That's what I tell people, with victims that are abducted. Usually most of the people are in such a state of delusion because it's so traumatic. They don't really know what is real and what isn't. Sometimes the actual events are physical and real. Sometimes they're more just playing with your head. Sometimes it's more of a spiritual, mental manipulation. We don't really know, and it doesn't really matter, because Jesus is the Lord of all three levels. But as long as you anchor yourself back and default back to Jesus and stand on His word, stand on Him as being your God, your protector, your provider, you're going to be okay. You can pull through. Even if you can't speak it, if you just say it in your mind, reach out, speak out to Him, you'll overcome and you'll be all right. Now, the thing is, they might keep coming back and back and back. That means there's open doors in your own heart. And that's the hard part, a certain amount of accountability. Well, I'm the innocent victim. No, you're an innocent victim, but there's something inside somewhere that you've either been traumatized by, or you bought into something that isn't right thinking that they're standing on. That's where you get a hold of me. We work together prayerfully. We come and find out what that is. We close that door, and then it never comes back again. That's my ministry. That's what I do. I don't charge anything for it, and people get a hold of me, through my email or on my website. And that's my number one top priority. I always get a hold of you as soon as I possibly can.
That's awesome. That's really cool. If people do want to get a hold of you, or if they want to find out more about you, your work, order your book, where can they go to do that?
I think my email or my website address is right there, echoesofenoch.org. You can go there. My email address is awitness, that's AWITNESS, and then the letter 41 at AOL.com. It's awitness41@aol.com. You can email me, and usually within a day I'm answering back. You know what? I don't mind. I'll give my phone number out too. Now, I screen all my calls. I have to. So you have to leave a message on my answering machine, but you can call me at area code 586-991-6389. That's area code 586-991-6389. I will usually pick up, or I'll get back with you right away. I do appreciate if you'd call like between 9 to 4 Eastern Standard Time, and not 3 o'clock in the morning. I have had those before in the past, but now I ask everybody, please, call me within this time. If it's an emergency, that's different, but not, I would get calls like 3 o'clock in the morning, and the person was more interested in whether they were going to be in the next chapter of my next book that I wrote. And it's like, no, I don't want to bum you out or disappoint you, but I don't put anybody on stage. I don't put you in a book unless I use a false name, because I don't want these people being paraded around. I've seen too many times where if people are made to be on this almost celebrity status, everybody's intrigued, they want to talk to a real person that's been abducted, then they start asking all kinds of heavy-duty spiritual questions, and it puts these people in a place that they're not really prepared to be in. They're trying to recuperate from a horrible trauma, and the last thing they need to be done is have put on a public spotlight and asked all kinds of questions that they themselves are struggling to find out too. So it's just, I think it's healthier if I just keep them silent and invisible and let them work out their own situations.
Well, I think that's a great way to handle it, definitely. Well, it looks like we are all out of time for this episode. I want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing with us your insights into this fascinating topic.
All right, thank you, Josh, for having me. I'll be more than happy to come on in again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we're gonna, for the watchers, listeners, we're gonna have a show next week. But again, that was Jim Wilhelmsen, researcher and author of Beyond Science Fiction. Jim will be back with us next week to talk about a completely different yet equally exciting topic. You have been listening to The Sharpening, and I am your host, Josh Peck. And as always, take care, and God bless.